Hi, I'm Valerie Englehart, and in this video, I am testing two things. For art purposes, I have pulled out a Daniel Smith Imperial Purple Watercolor Pigment Stick, and I actually got this from my husband for my birthday a couple years ago, and it's such a cool and thoughtful gift. I just didn't really know how to use it, and the way that I saw other people using it wasn't really how I paint, so I kind of just put it in a little box right next to my desk and went, one day the time will come. And the time come. So I decided to wet the pigment stick in my little water container and use it to draw. And one of my go-tos when I'm trying a new technique is an iris flower, because I find their shape and their ruffly petals just so interesting, and it affords the ability to try a bunch of different techniques and still get a result that says that it's an iris. Also, it's Imperial Purple. It's like the perfect color for an iris. So I don't have a pencil sketch down. I am just freehanding this, and I do have to keep wetting the stick because the surface of it is wet like watercolor, but as it goes on the paper, then you get down to the dry part of the pigment stick, and so I do have to keep re-wetting it. But I do like how that creates these just really loose and expressive lines. So I'm having a lot of fun with it. This is on hot press paper by Arche. It's 140 pounds, and it is on a block. And what a great coincidence, in my little travel palette, I have Imperial Purple. So I've got Imperial Purple on the stick, and now I'm going in lightly and just putting in a light wash of that Imperial Purple. And Imperial Purple by Daniel Smith is a lovely color that will granulate and split. It's not heavily granulating by any means, but it does have multiple pigments in it, so you'll get like shades of pink and blue. And it's just such a pretty color. And on a lot of my videos, I will speed them up for viewing pleasure, but this one I am going to keep at real time so you can see, well, how quickly or how slowly I do move on certain parts. I do want there to be some visual interest, so I have popped in some permanent alizarin crimson. I'm going in now with some French ultramarine. All of these colors, at least right now, are by Daniel Smith. And I'm still going to keep a limited palette. That is how I work. Later I will pull in a little bit of sap green, but yeah, that brings me to a total of what, 4 colors? Oh no, I'm going to do some yellow too. 5 colors. And the front petal, I always start with the lower front petal. It's just always the most pronounced to me. And so it's usually a really good starting point, though you do need to be mindful of where to place it on the paper because all of the other petals still need room to come off of it. I am going in with some yellow now. I chose to use a cadmium yellow hue because it is very bold and strong, and it's a little bit of a bully color. It will push other colors out of the way. The yellow is the complement of purple, and so I thought having a nice strong yellow would help pop and give visual interest against all of the purple I am going to be using. Now that I've got that first wash down on the petal, I'm wetting my stick again, and I'm going to add in some of those lines that are incredibly characteristic of an iris flower. Now, I did say at the beginning of this video that I'm testing out a couple things. Now, this one's the art-related part. I'm testing out this pigment stick and how to use it to create this flower. The other thing I'm testing out is I bought a new camera. I've been using my phone, but I decided to get a webcam because I keep running into technical difficulties when I try to go live. And one thing I like about this new camera is with one button press, I was able to zoom in. And that way you don't have to see everything so far away. I can zoom in on certain parts pretty easily without having to do it in post. However, this camera doesn't go up very high, so you probably saw earlier, though hopefully didn't notice, I had to stack it on my trash can to get it up high enough so that you could see the entire painting, so nothing's perfect. This petal on the side is not as important as that front petal And I do like some variation. If all of the petals look the same, then you don't know what's more important and it just gets kind of blah. So this particular petal, I'm gonna keep it pretty light in value. I'm gonna drop in a little bit of yellow for visual interest and also because the iris does have that yellow at the base of the petals. So I'm not looking to do something botanical and perfect and detailed. I am looking for the expression and the spirit of an iris. And basically that petal on the right is done to me. I think I only ever go in one more time to strengthen a line, but that petal's done. Pop in some color, let it run. I do have my board up at a slight angle to let that pigment run and cool. So I'm getting that left petal nice and wet now with some color and dropping in some of that French ultramarine. Because this petal is folded, there's a lot of shadow going on, and so I decided to use that bold blue to suggest that shadow. And one thing I like about having drawn with the pigment stick and then going over it with water is it does blur some of the lines, and yet some of them stay nice and vibrant, and I just really like that variation it creates. I'm picking up my board now to let some of that water run backwards into the flower, just to distribute that paint a bit more, and also because I was starting to think, like, I'm really happy with watercolor blooms, but sometimes they're a little too harsh, and just having a lot of experience painting, I was starting to think, oh, if I leave that bloom might be too harsh, let's just tilt the painting up, let that run back, and then put it back down. But sort of rinse and repeat on this. One thing that is nice, I don't usually have a sketch first, not even one of these fun, expressive watercolor pigment stick drawings. But the nice thing about having a sketch already done is that I can focus on one petal at a time a little more easily than my usual method of just going in straight with paint. And I mean, there's still a plan. I still have it visualized in my head, but I guess this lets you see a bit better where I'm going. Honestly, it also lets me see a bit better where I'm going. And it's important to think about light in this piece. So even though this is just a study, I do want there to be a sense of light, so the petals on the right side are going to be a much lighter value. There's going to be less detail and less of that blue being used than on the left side. I'm also being careful not to do all of the petals at the top at once because they are all touching. And I do want there to be some separation in the petals, because if I just go in now and paint them all at the same time, especially since my board is at an angle, all of that paint is going to rush in and it's all going to blend and be homogenized. And that's still fine. I can still come back with that after it's dried for a second layer, but I don't want to do that right now. I do want to treat each petal individually for the most part. So I am working on one petal at a time as I move around the flower. Going in with a wet pigment stick now, I thought that one petal on the left needs to have a darker center and needs some of those characteristic iris lines. Adding some nice bold ones to the front. And really, what is a study if you don't push boundaries? So I was thinking, oh, these petals are nice and delicate, but they're starting to blend together. Let's go on top of it with the wet pigment stick and make some really bold, expressive marks to outline certain segments. Now, I don't want to outline the whole flower, then it loses its impact. But by going through and outlining little bits of the ruffly parts, I'm accentuating that shape and giving visual interest by having some of it bold and then some of it fade away delicately. But it's also a good way to separate some of these petals that might start touching. But I'm okay with there being areas of lost and found edges where you can't necessarily see a line where one petal starts and the other stops. But there's enough information there that our brain fills in the data of like, oh, okay, that's that petal, even if it's not completely outlined. All right, enough of the painting has dried that I'm going to work on that center upper petal. I did you know, a wet part touched the wet part of the other petal and it's starting to bleed in, but it's fine, especially since I do have those lines from the pigment stick. So having some of it bleed in, I'm not mad. I like it. I'm gonna add in a little bit of detail into that like bearded part of the iris, and I'm not gonna make a new mixture. I'm just gonna pull some of that purple in because purple is the opposite of yellow. Just go in lightly and it will create some of that texture. Like I said earlier, I want the left side to have more of that blue, so I'm dropping in that French ultramarine. A little bit of alizarin crimson as we move toward the right. And wet pigment stick time. And I don't know, because we're so zoomed in, you can't really see all of the motion of my arm, but notice how I'm not doing most of the motion from my wrist. There are little flicks of the wrist, but most of this movement is actually coming from my elbow and my shoulder, and this keeps the marks loose and expressive, and also keeps my hand from resting on the paper and smudging things. I'm going in, I have a damp, clean brush, and I'm just lifting out some highlights on that petal. Because this is hot press paper, things lift really easily. A little more blue to push that back petal back in space. And time for some more expressive marks. And you see, this painting is almost like a dance, as most paintings I think are, in that I don't just do one step all the way around, one step. It's a lot of switching up of, okay, let's do some detail work. Okay, now let's do a wash. Okay, let's do this color in a couple spots. Okay, and then just cycles through and we go through it again and again, depending on how things are drying. It's just good to be attentive to the painting as it develops. All right, zoomed back out because it is time to put in the stem and a bud. I always see buds alongside irises. There are so many irises that grow around where I live. I have some Dutch irises that grow in my garden, and some of our neighbors have these really fluffy, ruffled, beautiful ones. And so there is no shortage of lovely irises for me to be inspired by in my neighborhood. So I do want this entire flower to be cohesive. So the same thing I did for the petals, I used my wet pigment stick to just freehand draw a stem and a bud. The buds are usually very dense in color, so I'm going in really with just that ultramarine blue and letting it mix in with the imperial purple that was in those pigment lines. All right, so I thought I'd used sap green, but instead I really did just use 4 colors on this. I mixed my cadmium yellow hue with the French ultramarine, and I'm letting it run in with the purple, so it really becomes quite desaturated. I decided to mix my green instead of using a green I already had and had intended to use, because I wanted it to be more cohesive, because there's no green in any of the petals anywhere. So I didn't really want to introduce a new color at this point, because the stem is not the most important part of this painting. It's vital, but it's not where I want all the attention to be, or for it to be jarring. And I'm okay with it mixing with the other colors and being desaturated, because greens in nature, you get all sorts of greens. I'm looking outside right now. I see some of the bluest greens I've ever seen, really light sage type ones, and brownish greens. So really, you'll see all of this in nature. And I'm gonna pop in some red too, just for some visual interest. And here's the finished painting. If you like this video, press that like button so I know to make more like it. And if you want to see more, subscribe, because I produce videos every Monday and Thursday. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.